thermal optics. That's probably the fastest growing gear category we're covering at Outdoor Life right now. But if you're not familiar, just think of that 90s Arnold movie called Predator. Predator had that red hot and orange thermal vision. And now, so many coyote and hog hunters do too. But thermal optics are spreading beyond just hog and coyote hunting. More and more big game hunters are figuring out how to use them, even while some state agencies hustle to restrict their use. I'm Editor-in-Chief Alex Robinson, and today on the podcast, I'm talking to Andrew McKean. He's our hunting editor, conservation editor, and optics editor. Andrew has been covering optics technology for years, and recently, he's found himself at this very specific crossroads. It's the crossroads of the popularization of thermal optics in hunting, and how they could have impacts on our hunting ethics and conservation. All right, Andrew, to start us off in this conversation about thermal optics and hunting and, just all the interesting and maybe somewhat controversial points about them, would you start by just explaining what these devices do and why they have been just becoming so much more popular in hunting in the U.S.?
You betcha. People hear thermals a lot, and they actually confuse it with night vision. Those are two separate categories. I think just right off the top, we're talking thermals. We could talk about night vision later if we want to, but thermals basically are electronic devices that use a special lens that monitors or that can register even small differences in temperature. Behind that lens then is a whole integrated circuitry. It's electronics that turns those temperature differences into images that we can see. That's the easiest way to say it. So it's like a binocular, a traditional binocular, or a rifle scope, with the exception is we're actually not seeing the vision, that's made by light. We're seeing the vision that's made by temperature differentials. So because of that, they can literally see into the dark, right? We can see the temperature signatures of animals, and other things like hot rocks or, sun heated tree trunks or something like that at nighttime. So it's kind of, I think the controversial part of it is it's kind of given us an extra sense, this sense to see into the night. And because of that, it's opened up this entire frontier of kind of utility and visual acuity, it's magic in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
But it's also fair to say that because of this fairly sophisticated device, they're pretty expensive. And I think that's one of the things I'd like to talk about too is I think the barrier to wide adoption at this moment is really cost. Capable thermals are running $4,000 to $6,000.
Yeah. But still, this category just seems to be blowing up. I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, they were just seen as a novelty or maybe some special thing for the military or just kind of out of reach for the everyday hunter. But that doesn't seem to be the case anymore. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, you and I have talked about this, that when we go kind of into the wild and we encounter, especially I'm going to say a demographic of younger hunters, everybody kind of below age 30 I talk to is asking me about thermals. How do they work? Can I hook them up with them? What do they cost? What's new? There's so much energy in the category right now. And you're exactly right. I think this is a really new thing that's taken them from either people didn't know much about them or they felt like they were unattainable or they felt like they weren't relevant to our space to now all of that has changed and people can't wait to buy one and use one. And so I think two things have changed. One is just the familiarity with them. One of the cool things about them is because they're electronic devices, they've got the ability to capture and share video and images that can be captured through the device and then easily shared. A lot of these have Wi-Fi and Bluetooth connectivity to a mobile app that just amplifies or accelerates the ability to share images. And so I think that's a huge part of why they're being widely adopted is people see these images, all of a sudden, geez, my buddy's done this, I can do it too. So it's just made them a lot more accessible.
Yeah. Okay. I remember when we kind of first started or you first started really like reporting on these optics, like, and their use in the US, so much of the action was coming from Texas, right? Because, very obviously these are useful tools for hog hunting at night, predator hunting at night. So is that kind of like the birthplace of thermals in the US? And how has it grown from there?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, absolutely it is. Texas has got, 2 or 3 advantages over the rest of the country when it comes to thermals. The first is ready targets in the form of feral hogs and predators, bobcats and coyotes, lax regulations, and I would say a population of aggressive hunters who are really looking to kind of push the envelope. And I would say maybe there's a fourth thing, and that is companies based in Texas that have built an early adopting customer base around the Texas hunter, who then are extrapolating out from that base of support. And so, yeah, Texas has been a real proving ground for this. And my first experience with it was there with what's interesting about what your previous question is, with military veterans who had some working familiarity with thermals from their time in the service and then came back to Texas and immediately and naturally put them to use at nighttime for hogs. And so the Texas thermal user is actually a really experienced and knowledgeable base. And I've actually tapped into that quite a bit from my reporting there. They've been using these for far longer than anybody else in the U.S. I would, though, note that there's a kind of parallel population that has been early adopters, and that's the Europeans. Because there is no prohibition on nighttime hunting in most European countries. This is like the birthplace of the gigantic objective lens rifle scope and the very subtle illuminated reticle. Those are all really configured for nighttime or low light hunting, sometimes moonlight hunting. It was a pretty natural evolution for that German and Austrian hunter then to use thermals instead of traditional optics. And so you actually see Zeiss and Leica and this company called Limke. These are all German optical companies that have easily morphed into thermals and are really, in some ways, it's kind of the state of the thermal art. They are applying so much of their optical knowledge to thermals. And if you ever have a chance to look at a German or a European thermal and compare them to some of the Asian thermals that we're seeing on our market, there's a really interesting difference just in sort of solid state technology and durability and feel.
And I'm guessing the European models have the advantage in those descriptors.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so we've got two kind of parallel growth trajectories of, thermal optics popularity. But now it definitely feels like in the US, this is about more than just Texas. So are there ways to use thermals in hunting beyond just shooting hogs or hunting coyotes at night?
Yes and no. And this is kind of where a lot of the friction is coming from thermals, is some states really haven't defined their legitimate use. And so you've got a lot of hunters who have them who are trying to, figure out how to use them. Is that, can I scout with them? Can I recover wounded game with them? Can I use them for regulated game species? Can I hunt with them? And so states are slowly, and in some cases more quickly, kind of defining the terms of use. But outside of Texas, really up until now, it has been mostly nighttime coyote hunting. I live in eastern Montana, where I've seen, I would say the last 3 years for sure, just so much more nighttime predator hunting.
So there are basically some states who are onto this technology and they've made regulations specifically for it. And then do you think it's the case that other states just haven't caught up to it? And then there are some states like Texas where like, yep, this is fine.
Yeah, I think it's you're going to see thermal regulation kind of mimic, I would say, the either more restrictive side or more liberal side of the allowance curve, like you see with other things. For instance, in Montana, we cannot have artificial light on our bows. So I can't have like an electronic rangefinder on a bow. That's, I would say, an expression of a kind of a restrictive kind of regulatory regime. So in Montana, where I live, you cannot use thermals for hunting. You can for non-game species, but it's considered artificial light. And so it kind of goes within this bigger bucket of regulations. other states, and I would say I need to kind of look at state specific things, but I think Oklahoma's one. I think some of the southwestern states really haven't addressed it at all. So you might be able to use it for game retrieval of a regulated game species, and any of the non-game usage is wide open. So every state is trying to kind of figure this out. And I think that the rise of thermals is catching states by surprise too. And so they're kind of having to figure things out based on their own experience or what neighboring states are doing. And so it's kind of a new frontier of regulation too.
Okay. So they're obviously, this might seem like a dumb question in the beginning, but I think it actually isn't. Now there are obviously big game hunting restrictions based on daylight hours, right? Sunrise to sunset, or 30 minutes before sunrise to sunset. So what about using thermals during the daytime? It still works, right? Or is there some advantage there?
Oh yeah. In fact, I have been sort of looking ahead a little bit to kind of use cases of thermals. And I actually think one of the more disruptive parts of thermals is actually for daytime scouting. The examples I've used is like, you can pretty easily, using a thermal in the daytime, when you're right, there's no restriction on sort of nighttime hunting here. And in some cases, you're not actually hunting. It may be preseason scouting, in fact, but you can roll into a place, like say a Western basin, and scan the whole terrain and find thermal signatures of animals and quickly decide, yes, this is a place worth hunting, or maybe it's not a place worth hunting. I didn't see anything. I'm going to roll to the next one. And so I actually think that use case is potentially more disruptive because it has the potential to kind of create two classes of hunters: those who can use technology to find animals pretty easily and efficiently, and those who can't. And if you take that example even further, those who do are going to be crowded in the areas that the animals are. And so now you've got a whole other series of social conflicts based around this technology.
Yeah, this is a really interesting point. And in some of your writing, you've had sources compare this to forward-facing sonar, live scope in fishing, where there is just this really ongoing struggle of the anglers who have it and are really, really good at using it, and then those who don't. And, those kind of offshore opportunities, they're just not available if you don't have forward-facing sonar. So we're not there yet, though, right? Like you haven't been out hunting and just seen a truck full of 30-year-olds rigged up with thermals, just like flying down the road, scanning every basin, going from one place to the next. Or have you? Please say no.
Not yet, but what we haven't talked about are drone-based thermals. And so this is actually the leading edge right now of states kind of considering kind of use case. And so if you think about putting a thermal aloft and the ability to scout landscapes, that is super disruptive. Now there's a higher cost to entry with that, and it's pretty specialized. And in a lot of cases, drones, even without thermals, have some pretty tight restrictions on them. But here's what I would say about that sort of rise of using these more widely, and that is, and there's both a terrifying part of it and I think a more restrained part of it. The terrifying part of it first is, given the high cost to sort of participation with these, I think a lot of hunters who are leaning into it are saying, okay, I can spend, let's say, $8,000 on a high-end thermal, but that's going to give me such a competitive advantage. I actually don't need a lot of this other gear that I would have spent money on. So it's kind of like a calculus of, this can give me such a competitive advantage. Maybe I actually don't need that $4,000 spotting scope. And some of the other things that you might have invested in. So I think that's on the one side. I think the other side, and this is the less terrifying side, and I can see an equivalency with the forward-facing sonar. At first, people didn't really know how to use it. They had this sort of race car that they couldn't fully utilize because there's just a steep learning curve to it. What I'm seeing with thermals almost on a monthly basis is people figuring out like really how to use them, like how to fine tune them. There's just a lot of sort of user interface that you've got to be able to manipulate. And I think this is, not to be too much of a FUD, but I think this is actually one of the things that's appealing to this younger generation who knows how to, like, In the old days, we would have said program our parents' VCRs, but these are people who are digital natives who can easily navigate all of kind of the complicated interface of thermals and are quickly figuring out like really how to fine tune them and use them much more effectively in the field.
Yeah, I remember from an optics test, I can't remember what year it was, but years ago, there was a scope that it was like one of the first scopes that would link through Bluetooth to your phone, to your cell phone. And everyone was like, oh my gosh, what marvel is this? And like a 25-year-old kid now would be like, wait, it doesn't link to my phone? What are you talking about? Yeah. Like everything should be like linked up and synced through Bluetooth. What? So that has changed fast. I think one of the like kind of back to the doom and gloom scenarios that I don't think you have to be a FUD to be worried about this. But I mean, if the use of thermal optics became so popular that they were really used by many people to find game, that just like, that makes glassing like almost obsolete. And that is like a core principle of big game hunting in America. Like we're just going to get rid of glassing.
So I think we already are on the way to getting rid of glassing. And
I was so hoping you were going to go in the opposite way of this, but go on.
So, and I think this is kind of a longer answer, but my interest in thermals is actually a natural extension from my interest in optics and observing our world through different devices. And so what is less scary to me about thermals is I feel like at its core, this is another way of assessing our world and understanding the world around us using a device. So if you put it in that category, I think it's a kind of a natural evolution of what we're seeing already. And you mentioned the idea of connectivity. What we've seen already, whether it's a laser rangefinder, laser rangefinding binocular, a lot of SIGs, BDX-based electro-optics, I think we're already seeing the rise of this linked device. And I think there's a growing expectation among users, and certainly as we replace older hunters with younger hunters and this demographic sort of bulge moves through, I think there's an expectation that we be able to share what we see with other people and with our communities. And so I think in some ways this is a really natural evolution. I think concurrent with that is this rise of integrated circuitry and nanotechnology that's allowing really sophisticated software and electronics to be packaged in these mobile, durable devices. And so you combine, I think, both of those things, the shareability and the high-resolution digital imaging. This is kind of I don't know that we should be that surprised that this is happening, honestly. And I think, too, it's not just in our community. If you look at birders who have such a community that's based around sharing and, recording observations, I think it's a natural evolution to see that sort of electro-optically, whatever, the ability to share images across devices and platforms is they're early adopters of this as well. At SHOT Show, we saw that Swarovski birding binocular that has Bluetooth capability and the ability to capture images and then share them. And that's really being marketed to the birding community.
Yeah. I mean, you bring up some great points. I mean, even just thinking of using, traditional non-electro optics, like the popularization of phone scopes, when was the last time you hunted with someone in their 30s who didn't have their phone connected to their spotting scope? Like everyone is recording, through their spotting scope already. So it does seem a bit inevitable. And I think the other part of this is we've kind of proven as hunters that as a whole, we're probably not going to self-limit. We're not going to self-regulate where we're like, this technology is too much. We're just not going to use it. I think there's definitely a group of us who will do that. But I think overall, like the hunting community will just kind of gravitate toward whatever new cool technology is out there and figure out ways to use it. Do you see that happening as well with this when you kind of compare it to stuff like, I don't know, cellular trail cameras?
I do. And I don't know that hunters will regulate ourselves very easily, right? There's a real sense of kind of competition and getting some sort of an edge that I've definitely seen with cellular trail cameras. I do think there is a kind of a structure that can maybe do a better job of regulating this than the states can, or even our own selves. And those are like the Boone and Crockett Club, the people who, and I would say the groups and organizations that aren't necessarily constrained by, governmental allowances, but who are kind of, I would say, the keepers of the ethical standards in our community to say, you know what, if a thermal is used to pursue this animal, we're not going to accept it as an ethically killed animal. And I think that's entirely appropriate.
Yeah. Has anyone, to your knowledge, has anyone come out with, kind of mission statements like that yet?
I think they're still working on it. In fact, I sat in on a Boone and Crockett Club ethics committee meeting earlier this week where this was the prime. And actually our story was kind of Exhibit A, talking about extending some sort of prohibition to thermals.
We'll be right back after the break.
Thinking of spring? Discover the beautiful white sand shorelines of Alabama's beaches and an abundance of outdoor recreation opportunities. Coast through miles of bike trails or tee off on world-class golf courses. Enjoy the thrill of a big catch when you cast into the Gulf of Mexico. Visit a state park or nature preserve for some hiking or birdwatching. Most of all, just get out and have some fun. Make your vacation plans today at alabamabeaches.com.
Okay, let's put the legal part of it aside and just dig into the ethics of this now. Like you, Andrew McKean, the hunting and conservation editor of Outdoor Life, what do you think about the ethics of using thermals for big game hunting? Like, do you have ideas about how they could be used ethically, or do you have ideas about cases where you think it would be unethical and kind of crossing the fair chase line?
Oh, do I have strong feelings on this? Yeah. I think I am like a lot of people who are experimenting with this new technology. There's such a wow factor. Wow, look what I can see. Wow, imagine all of the uses. Wow, this is such a powerful device in my hand. I think the next step beyond that, and I think so much of our community is in the wow moment right now. I think it's really important, and this is where I've seen just in my own use of it. I'm constrained here at home, obviously using it quite a bit, but even after the wow factor passes, I realize what a shortcut it is to traditional field skills. And I think that's a really important thing to note. This is, we've used the term, is this cheating? And yeah, it may be sort of a legally defined cheating, but I would say the bigger concern I have is it's cheating a hunter from developing core skills. That really is something that hunting, I think, should be all about, and that we should, as a community, be promoting and celebrating, not these shortcuts to some sort of success, but the actual journey is an important part of it. And I would say that the one place I can see the biggest friction right now is game retrieval. You could make the case that thermals are like an ethical tool to recover wounded game. And, it's a hunter's obligation to take every ability that we have to recover an animal that we've hit. While I agree with that, I also think this is one of the shortcuts. It's a shortcut to, I would say, one of the core hunter skills, which is blood trailing and assessing the after the shot actions. What do you do? And if you can just sort of fire up the thermal and go and find this animal, I think it's cheating your own experience. Yes, it's potentially is an ethically recovered animal. But, in the story I wrote about kind of looking at the quandary we're in, I talked to a game warden who said, what if that animal's still alive when you recover it with the thermal? Now you really are faced with an ethical dilemma of, do you put it down, which is the ethical thing to do? But if you do that in Montana, you've just violated the law.
Okay, so explain this a little bit, because this really highlights the issues with this technology and our regulation. So you can use it to recover a game animal that you've killed, but you can't use it to harvest a game animal. So if you thought you were blood trailing with the thermal an animal that was dead and it turns out to be alive, legally you can't shoot it because now you would be taking? Is that the basics?
Yep. So there's actually an adjacent regulation that's already on the books that may be a little easier to like explain or understand. And that is, in some states, it's actually legal to recover animals with a drone.
Right.
But almost all those states also have a prohibition on hunting the same day that you fly. And drones are considering that you're flying. And so if you recover an animal that's still alive, you find it with that drone, you can't kill it. You can't put it down for 24 hours. So really, what have you done? And I think that's an important kind of lens to look at it through.
Yeah, it gets really complicated really quick. I think everyone's kind of in favor of hunters being able to recover the animals they shoot. It does get down to a really tough conversation about the field skills aspect of blood trailing, learning how to blood trail an animal. And I think part of that doesn't really get talked about because it's like this intangible thing. But if you make a bad shot and you have to blood trail an animal, through the night or leave it overnight and then find it and, have this long, like tough experience, even if you do find that animal, it really kind of makes you reassess your shooting ability, your shot selection. It makes you kind of reflect on like, okay, what am I doing and what do I need to do so that this doesn't happen again? I wonder if you just recover the thing with a thermal or a drone like that night. I wonder if the feeling is like, that was fine. Like I didn't hit him good, but we got him. So it's fine. I don't need to like reassess my hunting skill.
Yeah, I think that's a really, honestly, kind of a likely outcome.
Yeah.
And kind of a heartbreaking one.
Yeah. All right. Well, if you were let's just say that you were the czar of hunting regulations in America, and whatever you say doesn't have to be approved. Just whatever you say, that will be the law of the land. How would you draw up restrictions around thermals for big game hunting?
I'm actually going to answer that first with how I actually might wave my wand and regulate thermals outside of big game season.
Oh, okay.
Because I think we're missing a point a little bit. And I don't think it's likely to happen. I don't think it's even in conversations with states as they consider regulations. But it's this idea that nighttime is the sacred time. It is a time for animals that we pursue to like have mercy, to have a reset, to like be safe from pursuit. And I think one of the things that thermals is doing is like piercing that veil and kind of violating this almost like sacred trust that we as hunters have with prey animals. And I know it's a little squishy, it's a little esoteric, but I think it's an important thing to think about. Like nighttime is animals' time. And for certain, it's one of the things that makes coyotes so vulnerable is that's, they've evolved and like, okay, we can't be seen. We're going to go to work now. But I would also say that if you extrapolate just from a strictly like hunting efficacy and almost wildlife management side of things too, the more we participate in nighttime, the more we are like pressuring animals outside of places they feel comfortable. I think we risk actually redistributing animals into these sort of sanctuaries, nighttime sanctuaries now. Yeah, and it might be the predators that we hunt, but you can bet that deer and elk and antelope are also getting harassed at night as sort of a bycatch from people who are out there on the landscape. And so I think we just need to be mindful of that, like the wider implications of hunting at night. So that's quite outside of the big game season. But I'm going to wave my czarist wand and say what I would actually do probably right now is prohibit thermals on public land. Because I think one of the things that would do is it would increase the carrying capacity of public land in general for all wildlife. But I think it would also allow private landowners to better manage not only game activity, but hunter activity. And so if you're a landowner who wants to get rid of coyotes and you got somebody, you've got thermals yourself, or you've got a buddy who was thermals, great. We ought not constrain that at all. But I think the public land part of it it's going to get more problematic going forward with thermals.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's a good one. I definitely not considered that, but you're talking about predator hunting, but even just like, hey, let's go drive the road and see if we can find that buck that we saw during the daytime. Let's see if he comes out like at night, right? Like that could become part of hunting without regulation of like, all right, well, let's go for a drive and see what's out there, and just kind of constantly be surveilling and like pushing these animals, basically 24/7, which, yeah, we don't want to do that. How about on the actual big game hunting side? Where should we draw some lines around legal usage of thermals?
So I do think that scouting side of things, whether it's in the daytime or the nighttime, is problematic. I think it does it gives us a super ability to find animals. I think this is where even being the czar of this particular world that we've invented is hard, because I don't necessarily want to restrict them from all field use. They're really cool devices. On the other hand, even before a big game season starts, I think they're super disruptive. And I really do worry about creating this sort of tension between the haves and the have-nots. And so I think any use in big game, with the exception of retrieval, I would seriously regulate. I don't think I would ban it outright, but I think we need to have some pretty rigid sideboards around it. The reason I carve out retrieval is I do feel like, it gives law enforcement a little bit more clarity in terms of use. If you say, oh, you can use thermals for retrieval, but not this, and this, I think it's going to be easier for a game warden in the moment to be able to define, okay, this was a legitimate sort of sanctioned use. I think if you say no thermals anytime, we're going to create a population of criminals that we ought not be creating. I just, forgetting sort of like the bigger picture, I just think that's bad public policy. But I do think if we can add a device to our arsenal to help recover game that's been hit, I think that's okay. And I'm willing to sort of trade what we were talking about before, sort of the erosion of those field skills, for something that's going to help us be better retrievers. I'm okay with that. And I think that should be a carve out.
And you get the clarity on the technology. Just across the board of like, all right, when we're hunting, this is all right, this isn't.
And I think there's some precedent for it. I think lighted knocks, when that, this was kind of a previous kind of ethical quandary. I think we settled pretty resolutely, and that is lighted knocks did not encourage us to shoot. More by and large, did not encourage us to make marginal shots at last light. But what they did do is allow us to better retrieve animals, because we could assess, did we hit, did we not, how does the arrow look like? And so I think using that as an example to kind of guide what we do with thermals is not a bad example.
Yeah. Okay. What do you see coming next in the world of thermals? Just like the technology, like what's kind of on the near horizon?
So we are really at I think a inflection point from taking these things from being kind of novelty items, which by and large they have been, even though we're figuring out more and more and more how to use them, as I was talking about. There is still like a lot of the consumer grade thermals are pretty fuzzy. Like, well, that's a approximation of a coyote out there. I think that's what it is. And as an aside, I would argue also, like, the ability to 100% identify targets at night with thermals is not very good. I think that's one of the problematic parts of it right now. I think there are animals being pursued and often killed that were unintentional because they looked like something different in kind of this low resolution thermal environment. That's changing, though. At SHOT Show, I was seeing the leading edge of a doubling of sensor resolution and display resolution based on kind of the previous sort of like standard. And I talked to a couple of sources who were like, hey, buckle up. We're going to see this resolution double every year. If you think about our cell phones and other digital devices, that's exactly what we've seen in other ecosystems. And so I think that should be an expectation and not a surprise to anybody. So those smudgy suggestions of an animal out there at 1,000 yards are all of a sudden going to be like high definition versions. And we're going to be able to like not only say, oh yeah, that's a buck, but that's that buck that I've seen on a trail camera or that my neighbor told me about, and like really be able to define targets. And I think that just sharpens this debate about what's allowable. Because I think our ability to see into the night is going to move from a wow factor to an expectation that we're going to be able to like start to classify animals at night.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, in some ways that like makes it a lot, I think it makes it a lot like kind of easier to allow, right? Like, great, we can like 100% identify what we're looking at. So yeah, that's super interesting. I think some of the stuff that like, I don't know, maybe you want to talk about this, but this is getting like a really futuristic of just like the incorporation of like AI into like some of these like digital optics of just like being able to identify an animal on a landscape, you know? Some of that stuff seems like sci-fi, like the flying cars that we keep getting promised and then like they just never arrive. What do you think about those things out there?
Oh, I think they're coming, and it'll be interesting to see like how these different technologies and user groups collide and collaborate, because I actually think there's a great frontier for this. I'll give you one example, like from a wildlife management standpoint. There's been some work on CWD researchers that are looking at like gut biomes as a predictor or as like a symptom of CWD. That's why like you can detect sometimes CWD in poop. That's a downstream effect of this gut biome that's going on with CWD infected animals. There's probably a temperature gradient that's different with that. So what if you could actually use a high definition thermal to find CWD positive deer? I think that level of like integration is not that far away.
Yeah. Wow. That starts to get really fascinating from, you know, just like a wildlife management standpoint. You know, it's almost like it could be as impactful as like GPS collars, right? Like they had to use like radio collars for so long. And then now it's like, oh, wow, we can like put GPS on the animals and get like by the second real time location data where these critters are. It seems like thermals could be the next version of that almost.
I appreciate we didn't even talk about night vision, which is it's an adjacent but different technology that I think once we start to harness thermals with night vision, with AI, with like, you know, there's a lot of appetite and there's a lot of sort of like technological innovation that is just kind of waiting for applications. And I will say this, I think, you know, if you look at the wider use of thermals, so think about search and rescue, think about my buddies here on the fire department have got thermals in their helmets to be able to see through smoke of a burning building. Like there are some really, really cool and I think very positive applications of thermals that we need to be mindful of and I think to promote. But boy, I really do think it comes down to this sort of idea of self-restraint. And I think as a community, everything that we can do to promote that idea of self-restraint and promotion of field skills and kind of the traditional hunting skill set is, I think, really important. And I don't think thermals should distract us from that.
Yeah. So you're saying I can have my thermals and fair chase hunting too. It doesn't have to be one or the other.
I'm saying that, but Alex, it's up to you.
Okay. Okay. Well, Andrew, thank you for this, and I will do my best.
We are all counting on it.
The Outdoor Life podcast is edited by Mike Pedersen of 85 Audio. It's hosted by our editor-in-chief, Alex Robinson. It's produced by me, executive editor Natalie Krebs. You can read Andrew McKean's full story about thermal optics at outdoorlife.com/thermals. The song in this episode was composed and performed by Pierre Locatelli via APM Music.